I'm going to give, it's 12:59. I'm going to give folks just another minute or two to join before we get started.
I think that's a good idea. And can you hear me, Sarah? Am I online on video? Paul Felice here.
Yes, I can
Yeah.
see you, hear you, and I've got your name down there on your right
Oh
hand.
my God, I'm really too organized today.
You,
Scary, isn't it?
you are. We're going to start to get worried if you're so organized.
I know.
All right.
Very scary. Yeah.
Folks, just another minute or so here. And for those of you just coming on, we're just giving it another minute or so here. Got a couple of folks signing on right now. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And if we have any more people hop on, wonderful. If not, that's great too. So welcome everybody to the Village to Village Network Frail Members Call. My name is Katie Garber. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Washington, D.C., broadcasting live from my home. And I, along with my colleague, Samantha Schiffman, share responsibility for running these calls. We are employees at Capitol Hill Village, which is a village in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Washington, D.C. We've been around for about 13 years now. And we've got a pretty decent sized membership. We're about 500 members and about 230 to 250 volunteers. So that's a little bit about us. I like to start the call for those of you who haven't joined us before to just briefly go around the virtual room to hear your name and then where you're calling from geographically, the name of your village, and then also if there's anything specific you are hoping that we can address on our call today. So I'm going to start in my left hand of the screen and kind of work us around. So I'm going to start with you, Paul, if you don't mind introducing yourself, where you're from, and why you're joining us today, what you're hoping to get.
Paul Felice here. I am a Services Committee Chair of York County Village in York, Pennsylvania, not too far from you, Sarah. And we are just getting organized. Basically, we are well into our 501c3 stuff and bylaws and stuff like that. And I'm more of a logistics guy. So on this adventure to do services to what we hopefully will have our good members. So.
Great. All right. Thank you, Paul. Next on my screen is Marty.
Hi, I'm Marty Lamb. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm representing Cameron Commons, which is a village in downtown Raleigh. I did not come with specific questions, at least not at this point, but I'm here to learn.
That's fine. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I do have content, that's very broad, and that kind of came out of last month's discussion to talk about. So, that's kind of how I like to run the meeting, is if there's specifics or not, we'll definitely get into some good content.
Okay, I'll give a PS, which is I'm a clinical social worker as well.
Oh, wonderful. Great to meet you. Love that PS. Okay, next on my screen is Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Watson. I'm a retired physical therapist. I live in Spring Hill community. It's an active 55 plus community, and we are an all volunteer village as of last year.
Great. And where are you located geographically, Diane?
In Lorton, Virginia.
In Lorton. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you. And next I have Vanessa.
Sorry about that. I am from Silver Spring, Maryland, at Silver Spring Village. I think we've met via telephone. I am the Director of Volunteer Services at Silver Spring Village. And I'm here because I haven't had a chance to come on in a while. I wanted to sort of, like Marty, hear what you had to say, what is on other people's minds, but also I guess I would add to that now that things are beginning to loosen up, how are people dealing with opening up, and what are we doing around rides and, and visits? How are we doing this, and what's our caution?
Great questions. Great questions. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. And next I have Megan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Bruckshin, and I am from Felician Village at Home in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And we are celebrating, have been open a year in September. So this is the first call that I've been on, just looking to see what other people are saying. So no specific questions in mind, but I am interested in hearing how people are handling the reopening as well.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, definitely very topical. All right, next on my screen is the Village to Village Network. I don't know if Travis or Barbara would like to just pop on and introduce yourselves.
Yes, hey, it's Travis from Village to Village Network, and I don't have any questions personally, but because I'm on these every month, but and Katie and Samantha do an excellent job, so just kudos to them, and keep up doing what you do.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks for having us. And then next on my screen, I have Sarah Fisher.
Hi.
Hi.
I am Sarah Fisher, Executive Director of ION at Home here in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just out of Charleston. And I'm just, coming to these webinars to learn from others. And that's where I'm at today. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. And then we also had an additional participant. Welcome, Delia. Can you just share your name, where you're geographically from, and if there's anything that you're hoping to specifically gain out of our call today?
Okay, my name is Delia Segrist. I am the Executive Director for Monte Sano Village in Huntsville, Alabama.
They did not.
They're out there. Bobby talked to him. He said you said you'd be right out.
Could you go ahead and mute yourself?
Mute.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Diane. Go ahead, Delia.
Anyhow, so yeah, we're from Huntsville, Alabama. We've been about 5 years as an active village. And I guess what I'm wondering is the level of services you're giving to the frailer members in terms of transportation yet, and if so, is it only for certain volunteers who are willing to take the risk, or what kind of rules are involved, that sort of thing for right now. Okay. Services in general for right now for frailer members.
Especially with regards to kind of re-engaging in this new loosened climate around COVID. It
Yeah.
sounds like, yeah, okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining. Great to see all of you. Yeah, we can certainly touch on a lot of this. So I enjoy both, sharing some of my expertise and our, specific village-specific resources. And I also love doing these calls because I learn from what you all are doing. And I think it's helpful to have an opportunity to hear from, from one another as peers as well. So I think we can start off, Vanessa and Delia both kind of mentioned, reopening and sort of what that looks like. So I'm happy to share a little bit about where we're at Capitol Hill Village, and then would love to hear, if other people are kind of with us or in a different direction, or and obviously this is going to be very different based on where you are in the country and whether you're an urban, rural, suburban village, et cetera. What the county or state, or in our case, district specific guidance is. So where we are, so Washington, D.C. has initiated, as of I think June 3rd, was their we initially were going to, enter stage 1. And but I say we, I mean the city, I don't mean Capitol Hill Village. So DC was initially going to enter phase one of reopening on May 29th, but then we didn't hit some metric by that date, and we had to go back a couple of days, but we reopened June 3rd. There's also been a huge amount of non-social distancing gatherings with all of the protesting happening in our area specifically. I expect that in the next week to 2 weeks, as a result of both the phased reopening and then these large community gatherings, that there will be an uptick in cases. Right now, it looks like the infrastructure that we have in the city would be able to handle those cases. So that's what my understanding is, really kind of what those phases of reopening are looking at. Is not necessarily that the disease has gone away, but that do we have the resources to care for people who become critically ill? So I think it's a little bit different for how we have to think of it in the village space, because we are working with a population, in our case, most of our volunteers, as well as most of our members, who simply by nature of the fact of their birthday are in one of these higher risk categories to be harder hit by the virus should they receive it. We have had several members get the virus. We unfortunately did have one death. Was somebody who had been in the hospital for a very, very long time. And so I don't imagine he contracted, I know he didn't contract it in the community, he contracted it in the healthcare setting. And so we have instances of this within our very, hyper local village, instances of the virus. So what we've been thinking about, and what we've been talking with, a local, I think he actually lives in Silver Spring, Vanessa, or he lives in Montgomery County outside the city. But he's a doctor and he's an epidemiologist, and he's sort of offered, community support for, he kind of just offered it to anybody at the beginning of this. And our executive director, Judy Berman, has been working closely with him as sort of almost like an advisor. So that would be one recommendation that perhaps would be a good practice, is to identify somebody who maybe doesn't have skin in the game, in the sense that they're actually an external part of the village. So they're a more neutral third party, and somebody who has, some medical and or, epidemiological experience to help guide us. So his name is Pedro Kremer, Kremer, and he has been supporting us in, and his recommendation is that we, as a village, because of our population, act more conservatively than the district guidelines. And as such, he was saying, I would recommend staying at least 2 weeks behind as the phases kind of reopen. I can say for at least around here, I think this is pretty national, but even as this phases get really specific, the guidelines for reopening anything are very, a lot is left up to interpretation, I would say, from my perspective, especially in our area. I don't know how it is in other areas. So what even saying, oh, we're going to stay 2 weeks behind doesn't even really, you can't really just like say, okay, we'll pull out this paper in, you know, the end of June instead of the beginning of June and see where we see where it brings us. But I think, and what that means for us, and this is different for every village in our region, even within DC, we have some villages that are still offering some rides. They're only offering rides to medical appointments, and they're requiring, you know, wiping down the car, face masks for both. One of the issues that I know we've talked about on here before in previous calls is just this issue of hands-on assistance. When someone needs a ride, you know, if I am waiting in my car and the person comes out completely independently from their home, you know, opens the door, or maybe I've opened the door for them, but they get in the car, usually they're sitting in the front seat. That's the easiest place to get to. So part of this is, can they get in, can the person requesting the ride physically get into the back seat? Then there's questions about air quality, like really keeping the windows down is best. The doctor who we've been consulting with, Dr. Kremer, said, unless, you know, windows down is best unless you're in bumper to bumper traffic and you can, like, there's someone right next to your window, you know, who you could essentially kind of blow on or spit on, they're that close. But other than that, windows down. We've decided as a village that we're not quite comfortable to be there yet. The other thing to really consider is length of time that the person is with. So for example, where we are situated, most people who request rides to and from doctor's appointments are going to doctor's appointments that are at least 15 or 20 minutes away. And if you were in a more, you know, suburban or rural environment where things might be farther apart but quicker to get to because you're not kind of navigating construction in a city area, you know, you might be able to get to someplace in under 10 minutes. But that length of exposure really counts in terms of when we're thinking about we're thinking about what risk are we willing to take as an organization, and then each for our volunteers, and then of course for each of our members. So those are the things that those are kind of like the key points that we're holding on to right now. We've also developed a committee of several members, volunteers, board members, and then in our case staff, as well as Dr. Kremer, who are kind of meeting on a weekly basis right now to just review what's happening. You know, it's hard to say I'd be surprised, fill in the blank, enter something about COVID, because it's just all been so, you know, wildly out of any type of reality I can ground myself in. So I guess I can say I wouldn't be surprised if, given the current exposure that's happening right now in our area, if in 2 weeks, kind of about when we might be saying, all right, let's inch forward more what reopening would look like for us, there's another uptick in cases and the infrastructure is more burdened, and we're saying, you know what, we're going back to pre-phase 1, we're going back to lockdown. So it's a challenge, right? Because we want to be prepared for once those phases are available to us, you know, and once the metrics have been hit, but also the metrics being hit have such a different meaning for such diverse geographical, you know, personal, you know, individuals' health status, et cetera, et cetera. So we have not, what we're doing is we're not doing any in-person volunteering right now. We're doing a whole lot of virtual activities, and that has brought on a whole lot of Zoom support. We anticipate that even as COVID recedes, which hopefully it eventually will, you know, as the year wears on, that we will still want to keep especially some of our larger events, on a Zoom platform, or at least to have a Zoom option. So we've really been focusing on helping people become more comfortable with using the Zoom technology, because it's not super intuitive. And also exploring, are there alternatives to Zoom that maybe would be easier? So far we haven't found one yet. But necessity breeds innovation, right? So I want to pause because I've been talking a lot. I see a lot of heads nodding and shaking, and I can tell you all are kind of following along, but I want to just give an opportunity if there are any questions about anything I've said or comments about what I've said so far. Delia, yeah. Make sure you take yourself off mute before you participate. Thank you.
I didn't know I was on mute. All right. Yeah, I guess that it sounds like we have some of the same rules in terms of wiping things down and wanting our members in the back seat, going only for doctor's appointments, that kind of thing. We've encountered 2 situations, however, where everything went fine to get there, but then not quite to get out of the car and that sort of thing,
Right.
which for some of the board members, I think is very scary and wanted really kind of locked down, and others of us, I think, felt like as long as we're taking sufficient precautions, we're willing to, I guess, to take a little bit of risk, because these people need to be at the doctor, especially sometimes if it's a really serious situation. And so we've kind of used a list of volunteers who are willing to take the chance something like that should come up. But in general, it sounds like our rules are the same: sit in the back, be able to get in and out on your own, that sort of thing. Of course, I think it depends on where you are. I mean, I guess we don't really probably have the level of problems maybe that other communities have. We're in a population up here on the mountain of 700 homes, and most of us are old, it seems like. But anyhow, but that was what I was wondering, if you were kind of in lockdown mode, or if you allowed it to, in case supposedly we're in lockdown, but something could go wrong. And are you prepared to deal with that, or just in lockdown period, we're not going to do any services, period?
I think it depends on what's happening on the broader scale to say lockdown or not. I think if things continue to go as they have been going, which is like our cases are going down, our ICU bed capacity is going up in DC.
For now.
Exactly. That's the whole thing, right? It's for now. Yeah. But I would say that if in another week or two, because now we're on day 6 of phase 1 in DC. So if we're following the doctor's guidance of like being 2 weeks behind, then I'd say in another, 8 or 9 days, we'd kind of be thinking, all right, like, have we seen an uptick, or is this still continually going down? And if it's still continuing going down, then I think we might start to look at some of I think the next thing that we would first start to address is allowing volunteers to enter members' homes, but to have the members socially distant and only for a very short time, like to change a light bulb. Because we've actually been really worried about light bulb changes, because it increases the risk for falls if people don't have light, especially in a bathroom setting, etc. So we have one member who's showering in the dark, complete dark right now, and bathrooms don't have big, beautiful open windows. At least most around here in the city don't. Those types of things we see as kind of preventative actions that we'd like to get in to do, and hopefully we could get enough information about, like, is there a ladder? Can the person bring the ladder out, or do they need to tell the volunteer where the ladder is? What type of bulb is it? Do you need a screwdriver? And do a lot more like particular planning about the task verbally before it happens, so that the person could get in and out of there fairly quickly. And then the member would, hopefully they could keep the front door open or the window open. The member could be in a complete other part of the house. And their communication would really not be that much in person. It would really be more over the phone. We might start with that before we even start with rides. I'm not sure where the committee will land, mostly because we can control how long the person is in the house for when they're doing a task like that. Whereas in the car, you're kind of stuck and you can't socially distance, even if the person's in the back seat. I would say that in the situation you described, Delia, my recommendation might be that then the member and the volunteer perhaps self-quarantine for 14 days. And that might be something that you recommend volunteers consider. You know, are they capable of self-quarantining? You know, especially for people who don't live by themselves, who do live with somebody else, or who are responsible for taking care of somebody else. Perhaps that wouldn't be. They might say, you know what, if that, you know, I think it's all about thinking through all the aspects of the risk. So thinking through like, well, what happens if the person, let's say they couldn't get out of the chair in the doctor's office. Would the volunteer have felt comfortable going all the way into the doctor's office with them? You know, it's just thinking through kind of, I think the least surprises, because anything could happen, and the more creative we can get about the like choose your own adventure quality of what we know volunteering looks like, then I think the better prepared everybody can be to respond in a situation and hopefully lower that burden of stress that comes up when it's like, what do I do? And I think part of that is, you know, talking it through with the volunteer and the member. And part of it is also being there as, you know, I always say staff because we are paid staff, but whether you're a volunteer led, just that there's some village presence that the volunteer could call and say, here's what's happening, help me troubleshoot this, so that they don't feel like they're left in a lurch.
So, couple things when you were talking. First and foremost, I don't know that the driver would be able to go into the doctor's office, just as an aside, because right now most doctor's offices aren't letting anybody in but the patient. So just an aside. We have had driving throughout, but the way that we've done it is there are only probably a handful, maybe, I don't even think it's 10 volunteers who've been willing to drive. And once they drive a person, they will only be driving that person, so that we're one-on-one. And it worked really well because, like Capitol Hill Village, we also had a member who has passed away because of COVID. She had not gotten rides from us for probably 3 weeks by the time even that we knew that she was diagnosed. But that person who had driven her, we put him under self-quarantine, and he was not to drive anybody but her, except her rides were not essential rides beyond that last one, so we were not driving her at all at that point. And once we knew she had COVID, we actually went, sort of like you said before, Katie, we went above and beyond, and we had him quarantined for another 2 weeks. We really didn't start him. She died the end of April, and we didn't really start him driving till like the first or second week of May. And actually, purely coincidentally, every time he has picked up a ride, the person who's been driving has canceled. So he actually hasn't driven since he drove her back in March. But that's just coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with anything. I guess where my question came up for is more and more of our members are now feeling more comfortable going to doctors' offices. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, we're still triaging whether or not it's an essential ride before we're even saying, yes, we can take you. So we're not taking people to dentist cleanings, and we're not taking them to PT appointments. We are taking for dialysis. We have 2 people that need to go see a neurologist, and one of them, they're 2 of our older members. It's a couple, married couple, and the husband is falling, and the wife, you know, has an issue that the neurologist has been following. So there's a reason. So the guy who keeps being canceled on, he's going to drive them.
Fingers crossed.
And hopefully this one won't cancel. Exactly. but that's sort of what I'm dealing with, is more and more people are beginning to come out of their shell, my verbiage, and saying, okay, I'm ready to go to a doctor now, and I need to figure out how I find my volunteers who are willing to do those drivings. So we did recruit a whole slew of younger volunteers in there, probably about 10 to 15, who are doing grocery shopping, which has been all non-contact. So the first way I'm recruiting them to possibly be drivers is see how many of them have actually gone through the background check, and then ask them if they're the driving background check, and then asking if they're willing to drive. But that's going to be my first real hiccup, and I'm about to come into it sooner rather than later, is because more and more people, or we have another, probably our oldest member, who is single, lives on her own in downtown Silver Spring, in an apartment, and she's totally on her own. She loves phone calls. In fact, we have been doing phone calls, which I'm sure a lot of people have been doing, check-in phone calls. And even though she is one person assigned to make calls to her, and that person's been calling her every day, there are at least 3 or 4 other volunteers that I know that are calling her either every day or every other day or a couple times a week. So I know she's got the social contact, but she's been sitting in her apartment all by herself, and that's been creating other health issues for her. So one of our volunteers, I know it, but I keep telling her not to tell me, has been physically distanced visiting with her. The member, who's 96, I think at this point, is able to come downstairs, and they meet outside, and they, sit physically distanced apart. But it's unofficial, and there are other people who are asking to do it, and we're not quite ready to make that official yet. One of our excuses has been that even in phase 1, and I've noticed in phase 2, because like you guys, Montgomery County and PG County is still phase 1, but the rest of Maryland is phase 2, and senior centers are still closed. So we can use that as our excuse, but how do you deal with somebody like that who's really on her own, except she's getting these social visits, but not getting out, is really not doing well for her mental or physical health? That's my question, I guess.
Were you going to say something, Marty?
No, that's,
No.
sorry.
Okay. Well, I would say that when we're thinking about, one of the things I didn't add, when we're thinking about how we're going to start responding, is one of the things that we want to reopen non-virtually are our outdoor affinity groups. We have a bike group, we have 2 walking groups, one that's more like exercise walking and one that's like, let's meander and take our time. The easy strollers, they call themselves. And then we have a Tai Chi and Qigong groups, and then also a Petanque group. And I believe Petanque has already started. They kind of took it upon themselves. So again, it's not like sanctioned, but they always meet outside in a park. They'll only meet for, an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And they bring their own water. They have like a way that they're socially distancing, and they have their own ball, wipe down balls or whatnot. So they've really thought it through. And from what the guidance I'm hearing from our doctor advisor, Dr. Kremer, is that when you're outside and you're socially distancing and you're both wearing a mask, the risk is so low for communicating the disease that would probably be something that the doctor would feel most comfortable with us starting to do. We're being super conservative and saying, like, let's wait another week or 2. But I feel a lot less nervous about a socially distant. It's fantastic that this member can get out of her house or her apartment and into outside. I imagine there's many members who can't do that without support. And that would make me feel more nervous.
She does use a walker, but she is able to get out. So
great, go girl! She gets out. That's what matters. So, so she's able to independently get to where she can socially distance outside. One of the other ways that we're hoping to support this is by being a resource for masks and for hand sanitizer and things like that. So if a real barrier is for the person who doesn't have a mask, we can get them one, get them materials. But I think that, again, basing what I'm saying off of listening to these conversations with the doctor who's been kind of helping us, that would be part of what I think we're going to be starting to do in terms of our own village phase 1 reopening, would be outdoor. And remember, bathrooms are a huge thing. So outdoor for a short period of time, so that the volunteer who's there isn't going to be gone from a space where he or she can use the bathroom for more than 2 hours, and for the member. But, if that's the member's house, the volunteer really shouldn't be relieving themselves in their space, probably in general, but especially right now. So just making sure, again, that people are thinking through, what could happen. And also in terms of sanctioning that type of visit, one of the number one things that keeps not being said, because it's so obvious, but I think it's important that we as organizations keep saying it, is like symptom-free, symptom-free, symptom-free. We know enough about this virus that it can be transferred. You can be asymptomatic, but if you are symptomatic, like, you should not be doing it. The volunteer should not be doing that. Even with social distancing and masks, once you're symptomatic, then it's, all bets are off. Call your doctor and self-quarantine. Yeah. So that's kind of like number one at the list that I think, at least in my mind, I keep kind of skipping over because I'm like, oh, well, it's obviously just healthy people. But I think in terms of when we're communicating this with our members and our volunteers, that's like the number one thing. And then we also want to make sure that our volunteers and our members have a place to call us for problem solving if either somebody isn't adhering to those guidelines and it's making somebody uncomfortable, or if they just find themselves in a situation that we hadn't been able to creatively, foresee, and they need some guidance. And we're with you too, Vanessa, in that, like, there's things are happening that we don't necessarily sanction, and we're not necessarily mad that they're happening. Like, in this case, it's a very good thing.
Yeah.
So we don't want to become the, like, social distancing police. We really just want to be a support for our members and our volunteers to feel like they're, getting the membership benefit, while at the same time taking on, and I'm trying to reframe it for myself. It's not about staying safe. It's about a mutually agreeable risk, that everyone's taking on mutually agreeable risk, and that there's consent involved in that.
I'm just interrupting for 1 second. When you said that, what came to mind for me was one of the most interesting things when I told the volunteer, he's definitely not a member. When I told the volunteer who drove the woman who passed away because of COVID that she died, his immediate thought was, do you think I gave it to her? And I had to reassure him, number one, you saw her a week or two before we even knew she got it. Number two, if that's a fear of yours, call your doctor and figure out your next step. Number three, you are asymptomatic and you've told me you're taking your temperature every day anyway. Number four, have you come in contact with anybody else, which he had told me he had, and has any of them gotten it? But then the last one was, I honestly don't know. And that to me was a fascinating question that he put out there. Do you think I gave it to her?
And I love that, because I think, my heart hurts for him and the loss that your village is experiencing. But what I love about the way you described that, Vanessa, is that's one of the questions we are responsible to be asking our volunteers. Are you willing to follow our precautions, knowing that it's not 100% guarantee you are not communicating the disease? Can we get to this mutually agreeable risk that covers us this much, but there's this much that's still risk? And so how will you be able to be resilient and process through if somebody you've helped ends up coming down with the disease? Best case scenario, they recover. Worst case scenario, they pass away. You know, is that part of that mutually agreeable emotional risk that you as a volunteer are willing to bear? And I think that's one of the things that has gotten lost with our caution fatigue collectively as a nation, as we've, you know, been in this now for so long, is exactly that. You know, that would be the first question many caring people would be asking is it my fault? You know, and so how are we going to be processing that for our volunteers? Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Yeah, Diane, make sure to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. Sorry about the interruptions in the beginning there.
That's fine.
I mentioned we're an active 55 community, and we've been doing the precautions and everything. And we have had to drive people, ironically, not so much to doctor's appointments as to the close by emergency room because of people falling. Not 911 sometimes in play. Sometimes it was just you know, the family said, well, if you can get her to the emergency room because it's less than 5 minutes away from us. But with as somebody mentioned, I think it was Vanessa, nobody can go in with the person. They go to the emergency room and then they take over. And what's happened then is the family has come to take them home back here. The couple of instances where it might have been a fracture and they might have gone into the hospital or something, or they might have gone to like a rehab place. People were not going to the rehab places because of the concern of what was going on. So consequently, here in the community, some of our most, what's the word I want, intensive kind of cases, we're taking care of people that were in a home from broken bones, not related to COVID. And there was concern about people coming in to take care of them. And for, you know, one lady in particular, both her arms were involved. Another person in particular, her leg was involved. So not walking, and having been in an accident last year myself with both arms, sometimes you get up close and personal because of just because. So we had some volunteers going in, and you know, sometimes, and I can't remember who mentioned it here, because something goes on for a little period of time, the tendency is, well, this is working out okay, so maybe we could do it for the visitors, you know, just visiting again, as opposed to going to take care of the caregivers. And so right along, we as a community were careful about isolating, but we have been able to walk outside of the campus. And so we have some condos in the building, so the social isolation and the need for contact showed itself there. So many people were going out to their balconies just to talk to people as they were walking by, just to have that contact. And so the agent, the committees here, one of them, the lifestyle committee, what they have done is some special projects to try to keep people engaged as possible. And we had an Easter rock hunting hunt and a scavenger hunt. And so people were outside just looking for things. So that was good. And as somebody else mentioned, you find more phone calls going in. But right now, the big thing is whether our clubhouse can open up, because that was the main community places. And we're not getting some clear-cut answers about that just yet. They've been taking care of, you know, wiping down, and everybody knows, but we don't know when they say a number in it. Is that total numbers for all the rooms have to be counted there, or so much per room? You know, these are the things that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think especially, you know, you have a campus, Diane, in Capitol Hill Village. It's, you know, we're not community, I mean, we are community based. We don't have a specific set aside community, but our houses are row houses. So it's like you could walk up and down 1 or 2 blocks and, you know, get some friendly waves or some stoop discussions. So that's something that we've been thinking about. Although one of the things that I've heard from several people who are avid walkers, who don't have fantastic hearing, is that when they go out walking with a walking partner, and again, this is something that the village doesn't sanction, we know they're doing, we're not really mad about it, but we just don't feel totally comfortable with it, is that they're not social distancing when they're walking. And in this case, this is a person who her husband had been in the hospital recently for a non-COVID related thing. But just from thinking from a contact tracing perspective, knowing that she's been sharing a home with somebody who's been in the hospital, and now she's walking in a non-socially distanced way with somebody else, you know, that just, I start to think about, and the reason they're not socially distancing is she says, you know, the reason I go for a walk is to catch up with somebody. That's my social engagement. And so it wouldn't really be fun, or it wouldn't be, you know, I wouldn't be getting the same benefit out of it if I'm 6 feet away from somebody, because I can't hear them. So that's another aspect, is that, you know, all of the challenges of living within a maturing body still exist, but we're trying to figure out how can we, you know, I was jokingly suggesting walkie-talkies, but maybe that's not a bad idea, you know, having a way to, you know, use technology to keep up communication while you're chatting or doing a walk and talk. Yeah, your phone, have a phone call and be on the other side of the street with one another. So you get that sort of sense of seeing the person and companionship, but yeah.
Well, they were talking about the social distancing and how it came about in the beginning was such emphasis on the droplets and the 6 foot ring. So the way I've heard some of the people in my community talking about, especially when they're talking about somebody that is a little hard of hearing, is number one, you know, making sure that the person who is doing the talking is on the right side or the better ear, so to speak, and just being side to side as opposed to person or facing each other. So you know,
right, exactly, because when we're talking, the droplets are coming out in the direction, and that's one of the ways that we've talked about how, like, maybe driving is a little bit more kosher in a way, because the driver and the, you know, you're not sitting in the back seat kind of turned and talking to somebody, but it's still just the smallness of the space is what becomes. So there's, you know, there's some good articles and research out there, and I'm happy to share for the group, you know, the articles that we have, like our little cohort, our committee has been looking at, that our executive director has been following, because when you were thinking about mutually agreeable risk, there's a couple of factors that are important to take into account, and I'll see if I can remember them off the top of my head, but they are distance, they are time, length of exposure. They are, I think one of them is like symptomatic or like known exposure. And there's one more and I can't think of it. Does anyone know the line that I'm going with? You know, we're in DC, so we love an acronym, but I can't forget I forgot my acronym. So there it goes. But there's a couple of these, and I can, like I said, I can share this article. This isn't something I made up. This is something that has been a helpful guide. But those are things to think about when coming up with having these discussions with volunteers. You know, we're really, obviously, as a movement, as a village movement, we're really big on community buy-in, and we want our members to, you know, what we do is for our members, and we want our members to be part of that. I think the challenge right now with that is that everybody has a different personality, and so everybody's going to have a different idea of what the agreeable risk is. So we have to come back and kind of say, like, here's where we are, you know, and we're probably going to be more conservative than a lot of our members. But if people are venturing out, we want them to have the tools to have that discussion with their family member or their friend, so that they can, you know, consider what they're consenting to. Yeah, Marty. And then
when you're trying to think of what the words were in the quote, in North Carolina, Mandy Cohen is our DHH director, and she's wonderful. She's a physician, and we're to remember: wash, wait, and wear. Wear a mask, wash your hands, and wait 6 feet apart. But I was going to mention about, since this is a frail members call, in a way, we've been around for 5 years, but I'm very good at confidentiality. So not everybody in the neighborhood knows about us. and we were getting ready to have brochures and everything printed to present, and then COVID came. So we're not sure how to handle that. We have been delivering groceries to a person who heard about us, and yes, they don't have to have any physical contact. They just leave the eggs on the porch. But also, and I don't own stock in Zoom, but we decided on our listserv to lead a couple of Zoom trainings just for the neighbors, which would be a way for us all to bond together. And it was on Zoom that we had the meetings. So there were 16 at each meeting, and 10 were non-board members at the first one, 9 were non-board members at the second one. But the one that's very touching to me about all that is that one lady learned how to use Zoom, and she's a caregiver for someone who had huge risk for falls, huge. And he's wanted to come to this particular church for years, but she was scared. But now that church has Zoom Sunday services. So he's going to every Zoom Sunday service. His wife is getting him some bread and wine to have his lips. So I think some possibilities with Zoom to overcome social isolation for some of our folks is something to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that is like, whether or not we wanted it, it's been a reality we've been thrust into what ways Zoom or virtual meeting space can be supportive. At the same time, we're realizing some of what, very specifically what it doesn't do for us. One of the biggest things that I've learned is, I'm actually not doing right now, I do have my camera on so I can see myself. But one of the things that I've tried to do, I forget, like today, is to turn my self view off, because usually when I'm in a discussion room with people, I'm not like looking at myself. I don't have a mirror there like this that I'm looking at and seeing what's my response. Even if it's just out of the corner of your eye, I think we tend to be drawn to our own image. And then secondly, when in a Zoom call, we don't know who people are looking at, right? So I assume you guys are all looking at me because I'm talking.
Maybe not.
Maybe not, and everybody, one person's eyes are facing this way, one person's eyes are facing that way. They're not directed at me. So there's some, artificial intelligence that's not really there yet with this stuff to make it feel a little bit more, it doesn't quite make you feel that same connection with somebody, like if you're in a room with them. So it's interesting. I think we'll see where, virtual communication goes in the next year and a half, based on this, massive social experiment we've all been thrust into.
So the other problem you have with Zoom is the technology divide.
Which is why we had the trainings to try to.
Trainings? Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about people who don't even have Wi-Fi or technology ability. It's not learning Zoom. It's don't even have the capability because you don't have technology in your house.
Yeah. Delia, you were going to say something, and then I see your hand too, Diane.
You need to mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, actually Zoom was actually where I wanted to go to next. So I'm glad it's already been brought up in response to the last comment. I've done some training with some members. We, polled them and said, if you need some help to learn Zoom, let us know and we'll set up a time to train. And I've done this with 6 of our members, but for me, it's very easy because I'm on a computer, and apparently with a computer, you just click here and you go there. But if you're on a tablet or you're on a phone, then first of all, you have to have the app, and then now they want you to upgrade, and so it's not as easy. And so we're going to try our first Zoom mingle. We have a mingle once a month where the members come. Actually, it'll be their second one. The first one, we only invited people that had already been trained and said they wanted to come. But this time we're just going to send out the invitation to the membership in general and let them, I'm going to have a couple of just drop-in sessions prior to that. But then the mingle itself is just going to be click here and, hopefully it'll work. And so I was just wondering if that's been a very frustrating experience, or have you only had Zoom meetings for those that you already know ahead of time, know how to use it?
We had 2 women's groups that were meeting every month for dinner and social, and we've all transferred to Zoom. And for some, that was a learning curve, for some that it wasn't. But for a while, one of the groups chose to meet weekly on Zoom, and now it's back to twice a month. And we'll probably eventually go back to once a month and maybe even leave Zoom. I'm not sure.
Do
But
you
that's been
invite
going well.
Okay,
Excuse me?
do you invite everyone, or do you only invite those that you know already know how to use the technology?
Invite everyone who was a part of the group already. So it wasn't something we just started on Zoom. It was an ongoing group that met monthly. So yeah, we invited everyone and we kind of helped each other along for those who needed some technological help.
Okay.
And happily, we didn't have some people that, you know, didn't have a computer or, you know, they already had some skills.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we've used, I'll just add, Delia, is that it's best if the host isn't the troubleshooter, the host of the event, because otherwise the whole event gets kind of like turned into one person's personal like troubleshooting session. So what we've tried to do is have somebody else kind of on backup who can be reached via phone call, who's sort of the like, and they're usually on the call as well. In our case, it's been some of our, we've made sure we have a staff presence on each call, so that the host is the member, the volunteer who's like running the thing, and they can kind of get going, and then we can mute the person who's having trouble and sort of troubleshoot with them over the phone or, you know, separately. That has been, I believe that, I'm not sure if that's less frustrating for the participant, him or herself, but it is, I think, helpful to have just sort of the continuity of the group continue for people who are not new to Zoom, so that they can really get some of the benefit out of it. We also have established weekly tech checks where anybody can just call us and like over the phone, just how they would normally, and we can walk them through whether it's downloading a Zoom app, whether it's logging in for the first time, whether it's getting on a Facebook, like anything.
Is it at a particular time? You said it's a weekly tech check. Is this at a particular time each week, or what do you mean?
Yeah, so we put it in, I think it was like Thursdays at 1 p.m. or something, and it was on our calendar. So members would see it both in our written, you know, like our printed distribution, which we're still doing, as well as our online calendar. And we would also refer people to it. You know, if someone's like, well, I don't want to join because I'm scared of Zoom, or I don't know, da 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 da. Now that doesn't address kind of what Vanessa was saying about the people who don't have the technology, although we also would want to have engage with a conversation with somebody about that to understand more about why they don't have it. And if the reason is financial, then we, you know, work within existing city, we work with a combination of our like low income member support pool that we have kind of philanthropically available to us, as well as city resources to see what might they be eligible for that they've just never cared to explore up until now.
So tech check just for Zoom? So is it tech check just for Zoom?
It's for anything.
Oh, okay.
I think most people were requesting support with Zoom, but it was for anything.
And the one thing that works with Zoom is that you can do it by telephone if you don't have a computer. So though it's an issue for other things, at least with Zoom, you can do it by phone. But I've been a participant by phone, and it's not the same experience as being able to see people's faces.
Diane, yes.
One of the things that's been verbalized in my community, when we first got the word about the isolation, you know, like anything, interpretation happens for different people. Some are a little bit more stringent, to the fact where some family members, you know, they just didn't want their parents to cross over the threshold. So we had a few people that did not go over, not even if they were living in a condo and could walk down to their mailbox and things like that. They didn't want to do it. The thing that I'm hearing, the ones that were the loneliest are the ones that don't have somebody else living in the household with them, and don't even have like a living pet like a dog or a cat. They solely are totally by themselves. Those are the ones that are verbalizing feeling most disengaged. Now, I have a question about the Zoom. If you have been a participant, you've got it on your computer, and you have had Zoom meetings, are you able to then initiate a Zoom meeting for something else, or is that a completely different process that you have to go through to be the one who calls the meeting?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're saying if I've participated, do I also have the capability to create? So it's actually, the answer is no. You would have to sign up. Well, yes and no. So I believe that for free, you can sign up for 40, you can create a meeting for, I think, up to a certain number of people for up to a certain amount of time, and it's 40 minutes. But otherwise you have to upgrade your account, pay for the service. So like at the Village, we have 2 accounts because we started with 1 and quickly realized that we just, needed 2, and we have 2 accounts each that we pay, I think it's $14.99 or $15 a month for, and that gives us, I think we can host events up to like 100 people or 5, some number that like, oh, I wish we could have an event that would have that many people come to it. But it really fits our needs. And it also allows us to, the reason we needed 2 was because we realized like if we have 2 groups, like let's say our men's group and our theater group want to meet at the same time, or even if they have a half-hour overlap, we can't host them on the same account. So that's why we have, and like, for example, this call is hosted by Village to Village Network. So I can be on this call and it doesn't clog up any of the, like, we still have programming happening right now on our Zoom account. It doesn't, so it's a little bit different when you're signing up as like a participant versus when you're the host, is the language about that. Yeah.
One thing, Diane, one of our groups, until somebody purchased an account, we were doing the free Zoom thing. And so every 40 minutes, we just sign back in at the same link. And you could. It was annoying, but
Yeah.
you could do
and
that.
for a social group, that might be totally fine, right? If
Exactly.
you're somebody come and speak to you about,
The meaning of life or something.
then it might, or end of life resources, that might be more jarring. But for a social thing, I think it's not a big, But the Zoom itself does have some tutorial available and some video tutorial.
And they're very good.
And we've been using that both internally for ourselves and also when, kind of if someone doesn't really want to do a tech check or they want to try to troubleshoot it themselves, we'll send them that first before they engage with one of us. And we're apt. I see your hand, Delia, and I want to get to you, but I just want to say it is 2 o'clock. So if you do have to go, I can hang out for another minute or so, but if you do have to go, feel free. And it was great to see you. And Delia, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I just was wondering if you had particular ones that you recommend as far as Zoom training, or is it just, because I know there's a lot out there on YouTube.
There's a lot. I think there's actually one for people, like, I don't know how they word it, if it's for seniors or for people who are less tech, non-natives to tech. But I can look up, in addition to I know I mentioned I was going to send the links around that the articles that we've been reviewing in terms of thinking about reopening. I can send that. And then I can also send you our internal guidance for Zoom and what links we've been using for that. I'll send that all to Travis so that he can share that. And it looks like we have someone else on the call. So I imagine, Travis, you all have a 2 o'clock or Eastern time, 2 o'clock meeting. So should we wrap up here?
I mean, I can hang out for a little while. Just it's whatever you guys want to do.
Oh, okay. So we're not crunching up. We're not preventing.
I have nothing scheduled after this. I just
okay.
have other tasks that I can work on while you all are talking. So.
Okay. So are there any other questions? Because I do need to shift back, but are there any other questions before we end the call?
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. I love seeing you guys. I just so appreciate you and all the work you're doing, especially, right now. And I love talking with you and hearing where everyone's doing. Thank you.
Okay.
I do have a follow-up question with everybody else.
Okay.
But that's, I know a few years ago, I was just noodling around online and found a really good YouTube video that was done by some village in the DC area. Well, that doesn't narrow it down. But since you're with Capital Village, I just thought I'd check. Do you have a YouTube video that would be really good training for volunteers? I know it talked about protective services referrals and that kind of thing. And is that something that you could share or redirect me to on YouTube so we might utilize it in volunteer training?
I would love to know about that. It's not something I'm aware of, but I can reach out to our local. Is that something you're familiar with, Vanessa? Have you heard of that? Or you all are in WAVE, I imagine. Yeah.
We are. I'm not familiar with something on training per se. I know we have a couple videos. One is on answering the phone and one is on our village that we just did, but the training would be that we did is on answering the phone, but I don't think, Marty, that's what you're talking about.
No, you're right. It was
Yeah.
more for volunteers, things they'd need to think about if they went into somebody's home or if they came up to the door, or how to make a protective services referral. It was very good, and I just wish I could re-find it and trying to think about training some of our volunteers.
I will.
I'll give you a clue, Katie. Barbara doesn't know either.
Oh, okay.
But Katie, you're right. You might want to check in with WAVE to see if they know.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara's pretty connected with WAVE too, but you know, it might have, yeah. But I will check with a couple of folks locally that we can ask.
I'm almost wondering if it's
Katie, also that on the B2B network, under the resources, go to webinars and down to the webinar archives. I was just looking. I do see one toward the bottom about volunteer recruitment. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but you might look around in there.
I think I did.
Okay.
And I think Barbara did. So I'm looking at training the volunteers on going into homes and things to be conscious of, and a lot about the boundaries. And we could develop our own. And there's somebody that I could probably ask to do the training, but videos are nice as well. So if you
was
find
it a video like of somebody talking, or was it a video with like, okay.
There was someone from the village introduced the speaker, and then she spoke, and she was a social worker, and I forgot what agency she was from, or if she was even from a village, but she was very good. She's about an hour.
Let me ask within our local DC villages here, and then also WAVE, which is the Washington Area Village Exchange, and ask if that rings any bells, and I'll also do a little bit of sleuthing and on our internal storage system to see if
that would be fantastic. Thank you very much for considering.
And if I find it, then I will share it with Travis and Barbara, and especially because you've already asked Barbara, she'll probably know.
There's supposed to be a WAVE meeting, I think, the next to the last month in June here. So maybe it'll be brought up and you'll find out.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I typically don't attend because of my role, but I will certainly keep that in mind. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Stay well. Hope to see you next month. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.